will put in.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know it. That's
I've never been able to do that. Isn't that a horrible Actually, Lil was hanging around up there.
I knew they were up here.
All right, Lil says you gotta sit down and shut up. I'm Ed Reynolds. I'm Lil's brother. I'm going to say a few words to kind of get things started, then we're going to open it up for folks to say words about Jim that they want to say. And in the meantime, we've got refreshments and that sort of thing, and afterward we'll just kind of talk and get to know each other. I see a lot of faces that I know, a few faces that I don't know, and I've never been able to hook up names very well with anything, so we will get to know each other in a bit. Mary Oliver, who's an American poet, says, "When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measles pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as a possibility. And I think of each life as a flower as common as a field daisy, and as single. And each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does towards silence. And each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was a bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened and full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited the world. Today we celebrate the life of Jim Gallagher, who did much more than simply visit this world. But we need to go a little farther. we need to acknowledge the passing of Jim's sister, June, 10 years younger than he, but born on the same day of the year, who died on Wednesday. We need, too, to speak of our sister Nina, Martha Georgine Lavert, and of her husband Frank, both of whom died early this year. These folks lived through some amazing history, and rather than just visiting the world, helped shape it. Jim and June were born on a homestead in Montana's Flathead country, children of the Irish immigrants who landed on the East Coast in the early years of the last century and ended up in Seattle before the century was half done. Before Jim was 9 years old, the New York Stock Exchange collapsed, and the world fell into economic depression. A depression that still raged when at 18, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCCs, part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's efforts to rebuild the economy. Jim's salary helped his family to survive. And if you visit Pennsylvania, where Jim was stationed as a CCC, or even drive through Mount Rainier National Park, as Jennifer and I did last weekend, you'll still see the CCC's work in such structures as the stone walls that line the roads, stone bridges, and things like that. They changed the world. When his time in the CCCs was up, Jim joined the Army a bit less than a year before the world was plunged into war. Frank Lavert, younger than Jim, went to war as well, and both the Reynolds and Gallagher families ended up in Butte, Montana. Nene and Lil as teenagers in a turbulent town in turbulent times when everyone contributed something to the war effort. Jim, the boy from the Flathead, campaigned through Africa and India and China, and when the war ended, he and Lil were married. Nene and Frank were also married after the war, and the Gallaghers and the Laverts made their contributions to the baby boom. Their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are part of their legacy to the world. In the late 40s, Jim and Lil, Frank, and Nene ended up here in Naches. And then, as my mother always said, they rescued us. In January, these two men, Jim and Frank, drove some 300 miles from Naches, north and east, to Ione in a tiny car. They bundled up Grace Reynolds and her 5 kids and what they could fit of their belongings, tying some on top of the car, packing it in willy-nilly. They hauled them back to Naches and made them part of their families. So picture this: 2 carpenters and their wives in winter, when carpenters don't work and don't make money, living in rented houses, little rented houses, trying to raise families of their own, took in a destitute family of 6 people. We all survived. Jim and Frank's work still stands in Naches. They worked together on the Presbyterian Church just down the road. There are drawings of the Presbyterian Church back here for sale, and I expect Martin to sell you one if you really want one. And then in the mid-50s, Jim and Frank built a house for my mother and her kids down on the river. It's been badly abused in the more than half century since its completion, but it still stands down there. And I have to say that these 2 men taught me most of what I know about being a man. About courage, about loving and caring, about work, about responsibility, and about having fun. They were much more than just visitors to the world. Nene and Frank ended up in Trout Lake, they and their large family helping to shape that community. Jim and Lil moved to Kennewick. One of Jim's proudest achievements there was to build the home of the year. And another was the founding of the Gallagher Garage Door Company, a business that he and Lil built and ran until they retired. All that, of course, tells us only a little bit about the lives of these people that we hold dear. And I'm sure that many of you have much to add about the life of Jim Gallagher. I'm going to read you the remarks of Gabe Martin, Mary's son, and Jim's nephew. Gabe said, "Jim Gallagher is an uncle that I love. To me, he was and is almost larger than life. As many of us know, Jim lived through some very trying times, the Depression and World War II. I have a feeling it sealed with him the big heart that would enable him to make such a lasting impression in those that were privileged to know him well. The memories that I hold dear of Uncle Jim are bittersweet. Myself and cousin Jennifer were picking on my younger brother Justin one day, and Justin's here somewhere. Uncle Jim saw fit to whip me, but also to tell me why I got whipped. The lesson: you don't enjoy yourself at the expense of the underdog. I now have the belt that he happened to give me, and I hold the lesson. I viewed Jim as a latter-day cowboy, and I looked up to him. He usually spoke softly, and you had to lean in to hear what he said. Leaning in was worth it. The Western cut shirts and the mother-of-pearl snaps along with the silver dollars spoke of a high roller. In my view, he lived and loved as such. He liked to excite the little kid with a view of the safe behind the painting. I remember the red caps. I remember the Thanksgiving naps. Jim always ate small portions. I thought that was classy. I remember Oliver the dog. I remember the barrel full of pennies. There are high rollers, and there are champions of the people. I think Jim is the rare breed that is both. I happened upon the homestead accidentally one night after dropping Caitlin off at the fair. Jim quoted, close to verbatim, an FDR fireside chat before I left. I'm proud that Jim was my uncle, Gabe says. I hope in some ways to walk in his footsteps. He knew that my younger brother's name was Justin. He constantly called him Judson. Why? He's an American original, that's why. Nobody can question that. I render a salute to the World War II soldier and one of a kind uncle that will be missed. Finally, I want to read you one more poem. It's called Perfection Wasted. It's by John Updike. And it seems to capture the essence of what one feels about the rich lives of those we have lost, and especially the life of my brother-in-law, Jim. Perfection wasted. And another regrettable thing about death is the ceasing of your own brand of magic, which took a whole life to develop and market. The quips, the witticisms, the slant adjusted to a few, those loved ones nearest the lip of the stage, their soft faces blanched in the footlight glow, their laughter close to tears, their tears confused with their diamond earrings, their warm, cool breath in and out with your heartbeat, their responses and your performances twinned, the jokes over the phone, the memories packed in the rapid access file, the whole act. Who will do it again? That's it. No one. Imitators and descendants aren't the same. And there'll never be another one like you. Now, some of the rest of you have some things to say. Justin?
It's hard to add to what you said, what my brother Gabe said, but I remember all the Thanksgivings at Jim and Lily's, and he was a great soldier and a great worker, and of course he made sure my mom and her siblings weren't homeless, which I'm sure she, but me too, we're forever thankful for. It was a great example of, even before Habitat Humanity came along, the type of person who was willing to self-sacrifice without any glory. And at the same time, he was humble, and I imagined from how he was that it was just because of a sense of duty, or that's how a man behaves. But you know, with all of his kind of great, larger-than-life acts for his country in World War II and after the Great Depression, and for my mom and her siblings, he was teaching his dog how to roll over and shake at the same time. Or when I was little, I always thought that I might reach into my pocket, and if I looked hard enough, if it was a certain type of clothing and it was new, I'd be likely to find a quarter there. Later on, I realized that Jim had planted those things. But no, it's much later in my life. But I hope to emulate as a father and a person, the type of man that Jim was. And he's always stood out as someone that everyone should think of from time to time and emulate to be thankful for.
There's Kenny and the son. Get up and give it over here. My father was a very devout religious man. He was a great father. Sacrificed himself for his self. Yeah, to make all good and make all right. Didn't quite know sometimes the spirit of cuss words didn't come out of his mouth, but he didn't. So humorous to it. But I remember the little woman in the family. One story, Jim passed me. My dad was asked to pray a lot. Friends and others would pray with him before he did that. And I remember hearing one time saying something going on in his life, and he said, well, you need to work your magic here. Hard working man. But jump out of bed and dash out there. I didn't dash out of it. Too much for anything to do. One funny story, I could go on forever long. I remember that story. He joined the Army. And during the draft, and I guess he was at some sort of, they were being talked to, the draftees, and Dad, of course, was joining, and all the draftees would say, join? You join the Army? What the hell did you do that for? And Dad said, here's what I told him. He said, something to wear, something to eat, place to stay. He says they'd all laugh like hell. They thought I was joking with them. Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Good old time.
One of my earliest memories of Jim was shortly after World War II. I was looking through a newspaper or magazine or something, and I found a picture of World War II surplus Jeeps. And I was entranced by those things. I had to have one. And they were only $100. And so I saved my pennies and didn't have very much. I had less than $1. And Jim came over, and I showed him the picture of Jeep and told him how much I wanted one. Well, he got out his coins and he made up to $1. And so shortly after this, I was telling my mother, all I need is 99 more dollars. But Jim will give me that. I never did get my Jeep. But when I was, just before I was a senior in high school, I wanted to get a car. I've been working in the summer and in the winter at White Pass Ski Resort, saving up my money so I could get a car. Well, Jim and Frank helped me look for a car, and they found this Plymouth that we drove around, and I really liked it. I said, that's a good car. But Frank said, no, he said, you don't want that piece of junk, he said. So I found this 1950 Chevy, and it wasn't running. He said, but Les can fix that, Frank's brother. He said, he can fix that up. So we towed it over to Les's place, and he tinkered with it and got it running. I drove it around Kennewick for a while, and then Lily and I got in it, and we're driving it back to Naches. Well, halfway back to Naches, it threw a rod. And my sister Shirley was at our house at the time, so she came out there in her car, and so we were going to tow it back. Well, Shirley didn't want to tow a car, so Lily drove Shirley's car, and we got it towed back to the house. And a short time later, Jim came down, and we went down to the junkyard there, and he found a 47 Chevy engine that McNall said would run. So we put it in the car and finally got it running. And that car served me well while I was in high school. In fact, it started to give me dates. And I was taught the pleasures of drive-in movie theaters. And I think that worried my mother. And so I think she talked to Jim. And Jim got me alone and he said, damn you, he says, you're going to knock her up. I said, well, shortly after that, I went to Yakima and joined the Navy. I told him to ship me out as soon as possible after graduation. Which they did. And I was never so happy to get a Dear John letter in my life. What else? Oh yeah. Then after the Navy, I came back and I went down to visit Jim and Lil. And Jim, of course, says, what do you want? I need your help on a job today. So I said, fine, okay. So we got up at about 4 in the morning and went out to the job site. And we had to sit there for a half an hour waiting for it to get light enough to work. So Jim was that kind of man, a hard worker all his life, and a very honorable man. Like Ed said, we learned how to be men like Jim. Thank you.
Some of you know that Mary and I have had the pleasure of the past 5 years of living near Jim and Lil. They in Yakima and me down the road a few minutes. And what a privilege that has been, and what good times we had. Of course, I had known Jim and Lil for many, many years prior to that, but I really got to know them well in the past 5 years. The four of us had dinner together at least once a week, one time at their house, the next time at ours. And sometimes we saw each other several times a week for other reasons. Maybe I had a tool Jim wanted to borrow, or vice versa. Or we would stop in at their place when we came to Yakima to do our grocery shopping. Or they would come out to work in their garden at our place, or to bring food scraps for the chickens. Point is, we didn't need much of an excuse to get together, the four of us. And always, without fail, Jim was of good cheer. He was a happy person, a good-natured fellow, fun to talk to, somebody who was interested in what and how you were doing, and ready to help you if you needed help. But even though he was an easygoing, gentle soul, he also had a lot of great passions. He loved, for example, to talk about his stint in the Army during World War II. His stories about that experience were endless. Partly because if you didn't catch all of an Army story that he told the first time, you could be sure that there would be reruns. But you never got tired of hearing these stories because they always told them with such passion. The same was true of the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC. Jim was in the CCC for only 2 of his 91 years, but he never stopped talking about those 2 years because the CCC gave him a decent job at a time in his young life when he badly needed it. Actually, Jim would not say that the CCC gave him that job. He would say that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a man he came to idolize, gave him that job. Which brings me to Jim's greatest passion, other than his work and his family, of course. And here I have to offer my apologies to any Republicans in the because that passion was the Democratic Party. Here is how many a conversation would start whenever Jim and I got together. Jim would say, "What do you know?" And I would say, "Nothing." And he would say, "And here you have to fill in the blank with the name of a prominent Republican politician. Did you hear what blank said today, huh?" And off he'd go. Sometimes he would get so fired up that his eyes would light up. The hair on the back of his neck would stand up. And you could hardly get him to shut up. Not that you would ever want to, of course. And sometimes, when a certain Republican president appeared on TV, Jim would rush to the television and put his hand in front of the screen so nobody had to look at it. Jim was an amazing fellow. Probably the most hard-working man I've ever known. And I have a story to illustrate that. Once, when Jim was 90 years old, he stayed with us for a couple of weeks while Lil went on a cruise to Ethan. And knowing how Jim liked to keep himself busy, I asked him if he would like to redo a border of river rocks that we had laid down around a large flower garden that we had. We had done a rather sloppy job of it, and could he make it look decent? "Well, sure," he said. He looked the garden over and said there was one problem. We would need a lot more rocks if he was to do the job right. So we, Mary, Jim, and I, got in the car and drove to a nearby field that had a stream running through it, and we began looking for suitable rocks. Jim was like a bloodhound. Somehow he could sniff out rocks that Mary and I just passed right by. Not only that, but he could carry a couple of them at a time, and some of them were pretty big, and load them into the trunk of the car. Remember, he was 90 years old. 90! Anyway, we took 2 or 3 trunk loads home before Jim figured we probably had all the rocks we would need. And then he went to work, hauling the rocks in a wheelbarrow as he needed them, and building a border around the garden, 2 to 4 rocks wide, depending on the size of the stones. For 3 days in a row, he would go out after breakfast and work in the garden, come back for lunch, go out again after lunch, work in the garden, come back in at dinner time, go back out after dinner, and work until there was no more light. And when he was done, I almost cried. Seriously. Here was a 90-year-old who had done the work of a much, much younger man. And he had done it beautifully. Each stone was carefully, perfectly placed. It was inspired. It was the work of master craftsmen. Even though only flowers grew there, we used to call it our rock garden. We now call it Jim's garden. And that will be its name in perpetuity. A testament to a man who was so easy to like because he liked you. So that was a Jim that I knew. Someday, I might meet someone who is as good and as decent as Jim Gallagher was, who is as hard-working as Jim Gallagher was, who is as honest as Jim Gallagher was, and who has all the integrity that Jim Gallagher had, who has all the humor and goodwill that Jim Gallagher had, who is as friendly and quick to laugh as Jim Gallagher was. But there will never be another Jim Gallagher. I was lucky that there was one.
Let me read some remarks from Stan Evans. Stan's the son of Jim's sister Mary and Jess Evans. Stan says, I remember when I was very young that Uncle Jim was a great fan of the Yakima Bears baseball team. It seemed that most every evening he would take Kenny and I to the evening games. He learned all the players and got so excited inning after inning. The team did more losing than winning, but Uncle Jim remained a loyal fan. Jim told great stories that he found ultimate humor in, and he'd laugh until he cried every time he told them. One of the last stories he told me was about how difficult life was on the Flathead and on the farm and homestead close to the Dusty School in Montana. He told me how he and his father would spend most of the summer cutting winter wood, and later with a team of horses and a sled. Remember, there were no chainsaws in those days, so it was a laborious job with a crosscut saw. Often at the age of 15, he'd go alone with the team to the mountains to cut wood. They'd be 10 or 12 hours long, Uncle Jim returning with the team and a load of wood after dark in the bitter cold. Patty and I have many fond memories about Aunt Lil and Uncle Jim coming to Montana to fish and camp. We'd spend a few days on Lake Kookanusa with Gramps and Mom or with Betty and Eli when Jesse John was about 5. We have home movies of some of those occasions, and we caught limits of silver salmon on Lake Kookanusa. Uncle Jim was picked by my parents to be my godfather, and he had a great name that will ring with dignity and respect and bring a smile to your face. Jim Gallagher. Fly high, Uncle Jim, and have a great ride. That's the Anyone else? Betty and Eli's son, Steve, will close with a prayer, a couple of prayers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve, and I was blessed to have Jim, Jim in my life. I'm just sad that he's gone today. But no, I always go with what my mom told me when she was passing away. She said she wanted me to be happy, and I know that's what Uncle Jim wanted. He wants to be happy. I close with this prayer. Give us, Lord, a bit of sun, a bit of work, a bit of fun. Give us in the entire struggle and sputter, our daily bread and a bit of butter. Give us health to keep us to make, and a bit to spare for others' sake. Give us too a bit of song, and a tale, and a book that helps along. Give us, Lord, a chance to be our goodly best, brave, wise, and free. Our goodly best for others, for ourselves and others, till all men learn to live as brothers. And another one that Jim and I have in common that is really dear to my heart, if there's anybody else in the room, I'll close with this prayer. Serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.
There are cookies, there's iced tea, good stuff around, and good people to talk with. So enjoy it. Anybody that plays the piano and would like to do so, we've got a piano in here.
Just turned what?
He never missed. You didn't catch on the round, is
Yeah, that's where the boys, Bob and I and Tara all live on
Scottsdale, so that's why I stayed there. And he's retired now, he's thinking
He's stopping.
Well, you gotta go all the way about I'll make a lunch on,
Might never get in there now.
yeah, that's what, volleyball, that. We're at it out, well, okay, you're gonna be out of luck.